Hey there and welcome back. So good to see you again. Joe Escobedo here, and today we'll be talking about experiential learning and development. What the heck is that? To answer the question, I'm joined by my special guest today, there he is, that handsome gentleman, Lee Changzhe, who is the creative lead global experiences at ZS. Thanks for being on the show, Lee. Changzhe.
Thank you. Very nice to speak with you, Joe.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've known each other for a while. We worked at the same experiential marketing firm. Seems like ages ago. And I guess, you've been still deep in the space. I've kind of stepped out. So I'd love to hear, in your words, what is experiential learning and development?
Absolutely. So a lot of it comes from the root of learning and development, right? And the kind of work that we do in my current consulting firm really kind of looks at how we can take traditional learning methodologies and make it much more exciting, compelling, and immersive. A lot of the work that I've done in the past has been, Joe and I came from a live events type of background. So, ranging from anything like a product launch to a big scale show or even a pop-up store. And how do we use certain principles in that area of live events and immersive theatrical experiences and translate it into a physical workshop, right? So a lot of times when it comes to consulting work, you would be going through a lot of the market research process. A big part of that is coming up with segments of customer types or segments of potential clients that your client might be coming to you for. And the goal of a experiential learning and development workshop is to take a lot of that and bring it to life. So a lot of what I do is I work with consultants, market research analysts to start developing stories around these segments. And we might create an immersive learning journey that could look a lot like a customer journey map that might be in terms of a digital app that people could then access and play around with it. It could even be a physical live workshop event where you would have actors come in and role play, different segments and perform in front of a live audience to really communicate exactly what these different customer or consumer segments could look like. It could range all the way to gamification as well. How do we then immerse our attendees at these workshops to learn about these segments? Maybe there's a quiz that happens at the end of it. Maybe they walk through a series of physical immersive rooms that we built to recreate the shopper experience. I've done everything from building a artificial hospital, for example, where you would then walk into a treatment room and actually interact with an actor who's performing as a doctor. And the goal of that is to really allow your attendees to not just learn about the customer or the client segment in a dry way, like they're just reading it off a PowerPoint deck, but actually getting to be immersed in it. So just a little bit of a background of what immersive learning and development or experiential learning and development could look like.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It sounds very, very fascinating. You talked about, multiple rooms, different experiences. You talked about, having actors play different roles. I guess the question a lot of people will be having is, since a lot of these workshops are now digital, how can you apply some of the cool stuff you're doing in the physical space digitally as well?
Yeah, so I think this is where people who love gaming and really enjoy, playing in a virtual 3D space would get a kick out of it. A lot of these things, with a lot of hard work, has been translated to online experiences. So, for example, we're able to build some of these physical sets in a 3D environment using things like Unity technology. Creating a space where people can then navigate through on their own. It could be done something, obviously live in person over the web through Zoom and through multiple platforms where people all log into a specific type of software, and they're able to walk through into these different spaces. And when they're in the different rooms, they can kind of click on videos. They can even click on a particular link that then takes them to a recording, or different materials that kind of really bring to life these customers. And then we pair it with a worksheet that people have to fill up, right? And as they fill up these worksheets, they score points. And when you hit a certain number of points, you're able to, say, unlock the next level, and then you get on to the next segment. So it's a really fun way of doing a lot of what we could do live, do it online. Your manager or your team lead can be with you in these virtual games to kind of assess your progress. At the same time, understand where is it that you're maybe lacking a little bit of knowledge, and work on improving that following this kind of a virtual event. So we're definitely looking at moving some of these things online. I don't see it going away. I see that this is something that is definitely going to stay. Doing something like a combination of a virtual escape room type of activity, and then maybe when you unlock it, it actually gives you a physical location to show up at, and then a part of the workshop could then be run in person, is another really fun and interactive way in which some of these experiential learning journeys could potentially go to in the future.
Yeah, no, it sounds really fun. It sounds like you're ultimately playing some kind of video game. It doesn't seem like you're learning. So I think a lot of people can find joy out of that. I guess two questions people will be asking is, first around is, do you need a big budget to implement something like this? And the second question they might be having is, can you do this similar type of exercise for like large groups as well? Because, even for some of my trainings, we've trained up to 1,000 people online. So having multiple people in different rooms and virtual experiences, like how does that work with larger groups too?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think a lot of these sort of learning and development experiential events tend to be very scalable, unlike a live event that might have a lot of physical components, like you need to book a hotel, and you need to book a venue, and you need to fly people in. There's like physical sets that need to be built, there's food. A lot of these overhead costs kind of go away. And I think a lot of that budget can be implemented into building a very robust virtual space. You would be able to spend less theoretically, because you can build a virtual environment that could then be reskinned, reused, potentially repurposed over a longer period of time. Because a virtual room, unlike a physical room, doesn't necessarily have a rental cost on it, for example. So I would think of these events not as necessarily 1,000 people attending at the same time. Think of them as maybe smaller bite-size groups of 20 or 30 that could attend these workshops, and then you could replicate it over a longer period of time. So think of it as it's more intimate. It's an opportunity for different people to have their voices heard when you do have a smaller group. There could still be a big plenary kind of kickoff where many people dial in, and then they all break off into these smaller virtual rooms where they can kind of take part in different types of activities, or even stagger it over multiple days. So I would say, budget-wise, I don't see it being more expensive than physical live type of events. But at the same time, you can absolutely retain the same level of engagement, and your dollar can really be stretched a lot further than a one-off live event.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point in terms of building it once and then reusing it again and again. I think the only tricky part in terms of implementation is you essentially need someone to project management as well. So one of the advantages of obviously doing a larger thing where you're getting 1,000 people is it's a one shot. And once again, it's not as intimate, it's not as kind of immersive as you talked about, but I think it's something that if you are low on resources, because most of the training development teams I work with, it's usually one person for about 6,000 people, or it's like a very,
Mhm.
very, maybe two people in the entire organization. So
Yeah.
I think the question they'll be having is, okay, what resources do we need to run this, to management, over a longer period?
Yeah, so it would be less around just having one person train. Obviously, it's going to be hard if it's replicated many times and the same person has to repeat multiple times. I think there's ways in which, train the trainer would be a very critical part of this process. Also, a big part of it would be how can you pre-record a lot of different elements so that, parts of the immersive game itself is pre-recorded. It doesn't necessarily just require that same trainer to be on every call. But think of it, we talked about how there can still be a plenary, traditional type of Zoom meeting where people dial in, and then when you break off into these games, there can be many facilitators that can be trained on how to run them effectively.
I think that makes perfect sense. And, pre-recording it, I guess, can take a lot of the hassle out, because you can leverage those videos over and over, to multiple audiences, multiple geographies, and so on. And there's a training company that's doing something similar here in Singapore, where it has like immersive experiences. So you kind of pick your path, so to speak. So I think that for me is like the future of basically what you're talking about in terms of experiential learning and development, is having them choose their own path and being more active versus passive. Because even as a student myself, I've attended a recent class for my kids, and I found myself really being very restless for like an hour listening to a very passive kind of lecture. So I think, to your point, how do you get people involved? How do you get them picking their own course? And then obviously, like you said, having a leaderboard, so there's a bit of competition to it, all these factors to make it a bit more funner. Otherwise, I think there's a challenge with some of these digital experiences. It's listening to someone talk on a Zoom call for an hour, and at that point you've checked out. You're watching Netflix, and it's not the ideal learning experience, I think, for most folks.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, in terms of, are you able to share any examples? I know we were talking about this before the call, but if you were able to share any examples, I know you have kind of a rich body of work, just to help people visualize anything that you've done. Are you still able to do that, or you want to kind of talk?
Yeah, I can definitely do that. So I thought what would be nice to do is to pull up some examples of work that that I've done in the past. A lot of this would be in the live event kind of space, so pre-COVID. But I think as we kind of prepare to go back into a new normal, where a blend of live theater, live learning workshops, and digital workshops come together, some of these examples might be really beneficial. So this is my personal mission statement. I'm very passionate about designing theatrical learning experiences that motivate and inspire business transformation. My personal background has been in the like I said, live events, theater kind of space. That's still an area that I really enjoy. But I want to see how we can use that in when it comes to learning, when it comes to education, whether it's in formal schools, or in the education space, or even within corporate companies, really to kind of transform the way people learn. One of the things I wanted to show you was a project that I worked on many years ago, and this was in the US for a lifestyle brand called Equinox. Some of you might have heard of it. It's a high-end gym, kind of positioned very similar in Singapore with Pure Fitness. And what was really the challenge behind it that the client came to us with was, people attend these cycling classes. So it's not your kind of typical workshop where you're learning about information. This is more like you're learning how to be a better rider, or you're learning how to obviously burn calories. And we ran into the big issue of from the client's perspective, that our attendees were dropping off, right? People stopped coming for the class, or they felt they were not hitting their calorie burn at the rate that they would like to, or for lack of a better word, they're not losing weight, or they're not not getting the body mass index that they wanted. So one of the things that I was involved in was how do you develop this sort of a digital physical experience that would allow people to come for this class, but using digital technology really motivate themselves to do a better job with their personal fitness. So we kind of like really looked at this intersection between technology, innovation, motivation, and it's really about empowering this high performance lifestyle. We worked with a sister agency on the digital side to kind of really build out the branding, the look and feel. So it's no longer just talking about it as, hey, come for this cycling class, but there was actually a name to it, right? They call it the pursuit, which is really about getting better and pursuing your goals. So getting involved in the branding of the program is a first step, when it comes to immersive learning or immersive training. And then we kind of really talked about gamification, and that was a really critical part, because when you try to meet some of these fitness goals on your own, one of the things we realized was that you tend to give up, psychologically really early, or you're not able to get that extra push to kind of break the next goal that you have. And so it was kind of critical that we wanted people to take part in this class as a group, so preserve that element to it, but do it in a very different way, where even the physical design of the space, you weren't necessarily just facing the front. We wanted people to face each other. So we rebuilt this entire space as if it was this harmonious intersection between technology and lifestyle. But really, it's about how do you create this sort of circular environment so that we're all facing each other, we're all looking at each other. And this is where the learning part of it came in, where not only were you being trained on how to ride, but we turned it into a digital game. And so what happened would be, as you went into this physical space, you would actually be immersed in a projection mapping of a riding game that would have your name placed on the board, as well as your calorie burn. So there's no escaping, if you were the last in class. Everyone saw where you stood, and that immediately made it a pursuit, right? The pursuit of not being the last in the room. And what happened was we ran these very short games that people did. So for example, you would have a warm-up game, and then you would do what they call a high burn activity, where you're required to put on your resistance to a very high level. The entire environment would then turn into a projection mapping screen that would show a specific kind of scene that you're riding up the hill or something like that. And then finally, at the end of the class, you've gone through these different trainings. You would see where you stood from a calorie burn perspective. There were other games that required you to team up with people. So like bike number 1 and bike number 5 were paired. And then, it was like, if you don't reach a certain goal, you and your teammate will lose that round. So there was this added pressure of making sure you didn't let anyone down. And I think the outcome from this was really, really impressive, right? The way people behaved, the way in which they went through the classes, the results, the motivation, the camaraderie that people formed was very, very impactful. So this was, you got to think of this, was done in 2013, 2014, so a good like 6 years ago. Obviously today, there are many other gyms and brands that are doing similar things. But this was really at the time where this idea of, we're not just coming for a class where you're looking at the instructor, but we're using technology, we're using theater, we're using multimedia, we're using gamification to really hit the attendee at all angles, to really make sure that they achieve their physical goals by going into their psyche, right? Using their frame of mind and using using a lot of these kind of human emotions and human needs and human desires to really make that difference, right? A lot of it, especially in the fitness space, is psychological. So a game or a class like that really helped to help people kind of just cross that final hurdle.
Yeah, no, I think those are an amazing example. I would love to be part of that. You mentioned so many cool things from like, projection mapping, and then obviously the way it was set up. But I think there's some good analogies, not only in terms of the physical space, like even like the corporate workshops we do in social and content. One of the big challenges is keeping people motivated and engaged throughout the entire session. So how do you get them, to your point, how do you get them warmed up? How do you make sure that they're ready to even take part in it? Because without that, I've seen, the first 10 minutes of any session are crucial. If they're not into it, then they've already checked out.
That's right. Yeah. I think setting up the context early is very, very important. People are incredibly busy, especially when it comes to say virtual learning and development or virtual events and workshops. So how do you create a really high impact title? Give it a theme. Your invite has to go out weeks before, but even prior to the workshop, how do you drop little tidbits or things along the way that get people really, really excited about wanting to be a part of this, right? So I in my current capacity, we've been, one of the things that we did following COVID was to design some of these learning games that always had a a very, very cool theme to it. So for example, there was one that I built that had a murder mystery angle to it. And you felt as a participant that you were gonna be attending a murder mystery activity, and you didn't know that you were actually going into a workshop that dealt with a certain healthcare perspective, right? It was really a workshop around understanding a patient's treatment as well as their disease state. And what has that to do with a murder mystery, right? So I think sometimes it's getting people really hooked on, hey, I'm not actually going for this workshop. I'm attending a networking type game activity. And then, think about ways in which you can send them packages in advance. It might be an envelope that appears in the mail that says, do not open till this time. It might be even a mixer that comes with a bottle of wine or alcohol that, at this time during the activity, we'll all take a drink, right? So I think there's ways in which you can really get people interested. And when they arrive at your event, you want to really create that opening moment as if the way you would at a live experience, or when you go watch a musical, right? What does the overture look like? Is there this really great video that plays? Is it in 3D that requires them to put on their 3D glasses, right? What is a way in which you get them to really activate their senses, be participatory, so they're taking part in it? Very, very critical to making sure you catch them right at the front and giving each person a role, right? So I'm a big advocate that a lot of these learning journeys, do it on a small scale. You don't want like 100 people listening passively. You don't want 1,000 people dialed in. You want to be able to, if possible, split it up into groups of 20, or smaller, and assign people specific tasks while they're going through this virtual journey. There's breadcrumbs along the way, and each person is required to play a part to not let the team down. So that way it ensures full participation. You don't have people checked out or turning their cameras off, or we're still kind of dropping off the call midway, right? We want to make sure that people remain engaged and reward them. So as they kind of go through each part of the journey, whether it's a virtual escape room or any other type of activity we play, they get rewarded along the way. And at the end of it, there's actually a prize for the group. So keeps people engaged, keeps people tuned into the story, and follow up with them after that, right? There should be a big part of experiential learning journeys is Is there an app that they can continue to engage with the facilitator post-event? Is there pings that get sent to their phone that at certain times of the day following the event, they're reminded about these key learnings that they picked up at the workshop? Are there extensions, right? Like audio journeys that they can listen to as like podcasting, or stories that they can hear about these characters or segments that they have learned about in this workshop that they can listen to on the way to work or as they go about their lives. So I think it's trying to always find ways of not looking at it as, hey, from like 12 to 1, I have to attend this workshop. I need to dial into Zoom. I need to listen, and then that's it, right? It's really thinking about it much more holistically.
Yeah, no, you bring up a very good point, because I think a lot of the times when we talk about training, we talk about the event itself. But I think you bring up some very good points in terms of, the pre and post, getting them excited, leaving those breadcrumbs, having that hook or that teaser. I always equate it to like a movie premiere. If you have a strong teaser or a trailer, you're going to get excited. You want to check out the movie versus you just showing up to the movie theater and just like watching whatever. So I think, like you said, that's extremely important. And then obviously the activities and stuff to engage them. And then post, what can you give them post? Because this is a big challenge. I think in a lot of training scenarios is you get people really excited, particularly if it's a one-off. That's why I always recommend like a series. And during each series, I always recommend like having an assignment or a project that they'll have to do. And then in a subsequent session, they'll have to be able to share what were the learnings, what they did, what were the results, and reflect on that. So that helps it. But I think the challenge is if it's a one-off, with most people will tend to do, how do you continue that learning? So I think some really good tips in terms of giving them those additional audio files, those videos, or whatever they can do to continue the learning. Because I think that's where a lot of people really drop off. They get very excited, and then afterwards they're like, okay, that was nice, but now, that's it for me. So some really, really good practical tips to think of it from a holistic point of view.
Yeah. Think of it as a campaign. Don't think of it as education, or, if you're looking at this from an internal corporate perspective, like this is just learning and development. Really try to tie it in with, what are you doing from a employee, engagement perspective when it comes to how do you tie it to your happy hours? How do you tie it to, some of the holiday parties that you might have? How do you make it into something that is just beyond a traditional learning requirement that people have to do? I think that is a big part of it. And if you're, if you're coming from a educational perspective, like if you're teaching at a MOE school or at a university, how do you think about this from a classroom perspective, right? That, your lessons need not just be a teacher at the front of the room that is speaking to the class, but could you create a treasure hunt? Could you get them to attend a lesson where what happens is someone's gone missing, and now you need to go around the school and to look for this person. As you go along the way, you actually discover clues that uncover a little bit about what you're trying to teach. So I would say get out of the mindset that it needs to be in a specific location at a specific time with a specific group of people and with a trainer standing at the front and people sitting in chairs. I think there's many ways in which we can look beyond that and allow the problem you're trying to solve, meaning what are you trying to educate people with, as well as, what is the outcome that you're hoping to get, lead the way and just go crazy with creative ideas, right? I think there's many ways in which we can use existing technology. We don't have to build any new platforms and build these very, very fun, robust experiential learning journeys.
Absolutely. I think, once again, there's some really, really good ideas for anyone who wants to implement this. So Chongzhi, thank you so much for sharing kind of your insights and experiences. I found them very, very insightful. So thank you so much for that. I guess last question is, how can people get in touch with you to find out more about you and what you're up to?
Absolutely. You can look me up on LinkedIn. I'm at Li Changzi. That's LeeChangZhi. You can go to my website at lichangzi.com. and there's a forum there. I'll be very happy to hear from you. I am from Singapore, living in New York at the moment, but always excited to get in touch with people from all over the world.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on the show today. And if you are in the training, the education, or even marketing space, a lot of really, really good tips in here. So take a look at today's video, listen to it again, share it with your colleagues. I'm sure you'll find it super helpful. So thank you guys so much. Really appreciate you joining us. Stay safe, everyone. Take care, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.